Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased to join this debate on this motion put forward by the member from Perth Wellington. This is a very important discussion because it's one of the biggest challenges that faces rural and northern Ontario. The greatest problem in policy is that it's made, by and large, by people who live in Toronto or in the GTA who really have no concept of how large Ontario is or really how diverse it is. They don't even realize, for instance, that there are two time zones. My riding is entirely in the central time zone. For those of us living outside the GTA, we know that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. There seems to be a belief that if a system works in Toronto or Mississauga, that it should work across the rest of the province. But there is a lack of realization that some of these policies just aren't feasible in rural areas. For instance, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to try to be quick because I want to share my time with my colleague, my seatmate here from Timiskaming Cochrane. But, for instance, healthcare delivery. It's different because of a vast geography, and the rules that are in place simply don't translate in the north. Rural health centers can't compete because of the fee structure. It's very different. Yet patients need access because the closest large hospital is sometimes hours away. Municipalities are cash-strapped, and they're paying for land ambulance costs because their coverage area is thousands of kilometers with limited resources. It just doesn't work in the north. I know in some areas of the province there are private companies who are able to step in. It's just not profitable in Northern Ontario, at least in Northwestern Ontario. Access to essential government services is blocked because the government doesn't realize the problems it creates when every town does not have access to essentials like ID cards, health cards, or other ID. I've had a steady stream of people who come into my office who aren't able to get jobs because they aren't able to access these ID services. Programs like the Mandatory Vehicle Branding Program have no way of adapting to northern realities. The entire riding of Kenora-Rainy River, which is the largest riding in the province, has a total of 0 service centers operating this service because it's too costly and there's too much liability, meaning that if people are coming from out west, they want to set up in northwestern Ontario, they have to find a way to illegally get their vehicle to Thunder Bay, some 400 kilometers away. That's a huge gap. Even programs like Ontario Works and ODSP, their intake is limited because they require in-person interviews, requiring someone who lives in my riding in Ignace to travel all the way to Thunder Bay to do an in-person intake. Again, it's not feasible for people who just don't have the resources to make that trek, and with bus service being limited. Injured workers, for example, are expected to travel to Toronto to be reassessed by WSIB, and even the recent legislation, like the anti-bullying bill, does look good on paper, but in practice, it's very problematic. What happens to a person who lives in Ignace, a child who is, guilty of bullying? Do we condemn them to a life of no education because the nearest school is over 100 kilometers away? School boards are being told to amalgamate to save money despite geographic regions that are big enough that you could fit 10 or even 20 different southern school boards could fit in some of these large rural northern school boards. There's just no realization of these challenges. And I wanted to close by talking about Nova Scotia. They've been trying to experiment with a novel idea, moving departments and ministries outside of main urban centers to ensure that they have a fuller view of the needs of the province. This isn't a bad idea that we should maybe consider in Ontario. Why not expand some of the ministries that are provided out of Thunder Bay, for instance? This motion is very important, but it's also important that we create permanent structures to review legislation for the shortcomings, some of the shortcomings that I have raised. This motion doesn't go far enough. It identifies that we need to reevaluate, but how? I respectfully suggest that we enact the motion that my seatmate here, the member from Timiskaming Cochrane, brought forward to create a Northern Committee. Maybe we should take that model and we should create a rural committee or something to that effect, where we as legislators can have greater control over the legislation that comes forward, existing legislation, and I think things should work a little better, and how the people of this province expect them to work. Thank you very much.